Welcome to Beyond the Lab, a series by the Office of Career Development within the Biomedical Research, Education, and Training Department of the Vanderbilt School of Medicine. I'm here today with Karissa Culbreath. She graduated in 2008 in the Microbiology and Immunology Department of Vanderbilt. So we're glad to have you back.
Thank you.
Yes.
Glad to be back.
So tell us what you did while you were at Vanderbilt.
So while I was at Vanderbilt, I worked in the laboratory of Mary Zuder, and she studies a group of proteins that are called integrins, and they're expressed on a lot of cells in the body, but one thing that her lab helped to uncover is that they can be expressed on cells in the immune system called mast cells. And we looked at the role of mast cells in the innate immune response to Listeria infections using a mouse model, and that was my work there.
So what has your path been since Vanderbilt?
So my career path since leaving Vanderbilt, I identified a fellowship program through the American Society of Microbiology called Clinical Microbiology Fellowships. And through that, it's a 2-year postdoctoral fellowship. There's not very many in the country. Right now, there are about 12 to 14 different fellowship programs throughout the country. And these fellowship programs help to prepare you for a career in clinical microbiology. So it's a very intense 2-year fellowship. It was the hardest 2 years that I've ever done, but it's extremely rewarding. And that led me to my job that I have now as a clinical microbiology lab director.
Okay, so tell me about what you're doing now.
So now my responsibilities in directing the clinical microbiology lab is basically the laboratory that all of the infectious samples come in a hospital or outpatient clinic setting. So everything from somebody who may have strep throat or may have a urinary tract infections to diagnosis of HIV and diagnosis of fungal infections in the body. So all of the entire range of specimens come into the laboratory, and it's my responsibility to ensure that all the testing is done to the highest level of standards, implementing new tests, making sure that quality control and the technologists that perform the test perform them well. I also have a very strong role in the hospital. So I work every day with clinicians, working with them in terms of how to diagnose specific infections, what particular organisms may be resistant to when it comes to antibiotic treatment. I also work with the pharmacy department. I work with the infectious disease department. So I really am integrated as part of the whole clinical services in the hospital.
So what does a clinical microbiologist do?
Well, a little bit of everything we do. We really are, when it comes to the day-to-day responsibilities, work side by side with the technologists in the laboratory that really do all of the hard work and aiding them with difficult cases and difficult diagnoses. We also work with clinicians, on the phone a lot, talking about results, talking about potential tests when it comes to a difficult diagnosis to make. I often will get a phone call from one of my clinical colleagues asking me about specific testing. They may give me a specific set of symptoms and ask me, so what do you think? Because when it comes down to it, they know everything there is to know kind of about how to treat and how to deal with the human body. But when it comes to some of the more obscure organisms that can cause infections, I know a lot more about those. And so they use me as that type of resource for the really challenging cases. And then just working, side by side with clinical colleagues, handling even just some of the routine cases.
Okay. So what does a typical day look like then?
Well, my typical day, I usually will have some type of conference on the clinical side, whether it's infectious disease conference or pathology conference. Sometimes I go to conferences within the other departments, surgery or other critical care departments, to just facilitate that interaction so they see me more outside of the laboratory and I'm not just that person in the basement doing, the crazy work. So I have that. I daily round with my technologist. So every day I go through the benches, is, have the lab coat on, asking, what can I help you with? How can I help you with these difficult cases, so that they have a resource to go to. And then I still spend, a lot of my day reading journal articles, trying to stay up on the latest technologies that are available. There's so many new technologies on the market, and microbiology is really in this new, very exciting avenue with lots of new technologies. It's been the same really since the days of Pasteur, right? And, since the days where cultures and agar was first identified. And now we've entered into a very new time. It's a very exciting time to be a part of it, but also very challenging as I have to stay on top of all of these new developments.
Okay, so how is being a clinical microbiologist a good fit for you skill-wise?
I think it's the best fit for me because I had always desired to use my PhD in a way that impacted people and impacted health. I liked the science, and I knew that fit me. I knew the lab fit me, but there was a certain aspect that I still was craving while in grad school, that I needed to feel that my work was going to have an impact on the people that were around me. So in clinical microbiology, every single day, every single thing that I do has a huge impact on a person. For every single thing that I touch, every sample that I touch, there's a patient behind that sample. And sometimes it's something as simple, as a throat swab that was collected, but sometimes we're dealing with brain tissue and surgical specimens that are precious specimens that a patient had to go under the knife to get taken. And so it's really important to me that I, use that to really drive me and motivate me. One of my other passions is working in resource-limited settings. So during my fellowship, I actually spent 2 months in Africa, and I helped them to develop some new tests for HIV and help to refine some of their testing for tuberculosis in the lab. So I've been able to use that in that way, but also I've really learned that here in the United States, in New Mexico, in the Southwest in particular, there's regions that are very, very resource limited and very resource poor, and that need healthcare that's accessible, and they need laboratory testing that's accessible. And so I've been able to use that set of skills and that passion to really aid people in those areas that are resource limited, even here in this country.
Great. So would you say that a postdoc is required or recommended for being in your field or your industry?
I would definitely recommend a postdoc. There's through the American Society for Microbiology, they have the approved postdoctoral fellowships. The benefit of the postdoc is that you have a very defined role and responsibility in the lab. You know exactly what you're there to do, and so does your advisor. So to be able to have one of these approved postdocs, they have to go through an accreditation process. They have to maintain that accreditation. And so it's a huge benefit. There's a board exam that you can take after the postdoc. After your 2-year postdoc, you can take that board exam. If you don't do the approved postdoctoral fellowship, you can still sit for the board exams, but you have to spend 3 years in training under a approved laboratory director before you can sit for that board exam. The people who do the postdoctoral fellowship that's approved by ASM, they do much better on their board exams, and we have a really strong network. So I think it's definitely beneficial to do one of the approved postdocs.
Okay. So what kind of skills did you have to gain after you were here at Vanderbilt? What are some of the skills that you needed to develop?
Yeah, so, one of the reasons why it was the hardest 2 years that I had is you start, when you're in grad school, you know everything there is to know about 2 proteins, one, cell type. There's just, but you know everything there is to know about a very small amount of information, or a very small subset of cells or whatever. When I entered into the fellowship program, I had to start learning about medicine. I had to learn about things that I had only only known through watching ER and Grey's Anatomy. So what is a CBC? What's that? What's a Kim 7? All of these tests that you only hear, on TV. I had to understand what those tests were. I had to know what normal was, abnormal ranges. I had to know how to interpret those type of tests because I was now part of the clinical care of a patient. And so understanding what those meant, I didn't have to do anything necessarily with them, but I needed to be able to sit and discuss with my clinical colleagues in ways that made sense to them. So I had to learn a lot about clinical medicine, a lot of clinical information. And then on the other side, I had to learn a lot about bacteria and viruses and parasites and fungus and different morphologies. And so the tools that I learned in grad school were really how to think, how to ask questions, how to interpret the information. And those are tools that are valuable in every career. And then it was my fellowship that really gave me the specifics to be able to be successful in my career.
Okay. So what are the steps, just moving on now to the job search, what are the steps that you took to actually get your current job?
So I was searching for my current job while I was studying for my board exams. And one of the things that I think is so important is for people to use LinkedIn and use it really as a tool. And it's not a social networking tool. It's really about career networking. So it's not about saying hi and posting pictures of your cats and things like that. But I made a lot of contacts through LinkedIn. And it's amazing how receptive people were to me. I was entering into the job market at a very challenging time, which was right at the economic downturn. In 2010, there were a lot of jobs that were not available, that were not accessible. There was a lot of job freezes. But I would reach out to people on LinkedIn either through friends and ask them to make introductions, or I would just find somebody. There was a particular woman that I loved her career. When I looked at her bio and I looked at her career path, I was like, this is me. This is who I want to be. And so I reached out to her. I told her who I was and told her what I was interested in and what I had done in the past. And she immediately started sending me email addresses of people to contact, helping me to make phone calls, helping me to make contacts. And people are really more open than we think. And as we start to narrow our career foci, there's not as many people. It's a small group. And so when somebody finds somebody who's interested in what they do, they get a little bit excited too, and they want to help you. And there's not so many people out there that are just mean-hearted and don't want to help. So I really think using LinkedIn as a tool to help get into a career path is a great thing for people to do.
Okay. So I'm sure you've interviewed before as well in your job search. What are some maybe interesting tidbits or advice that you might have for the interview experience?
I think for the interview experience, if you're starting in a new area, so for me, when I was interviewing for my clinical microbiology fellowships, going from a PhD in microbiology, immunology to clinical microbiology fellowship doesn't sound like it should be a big jump, but it's a huge jump. So one of the things that I did that I think was the best thing that I did for my interviews is that I actually reached out to somebody at Vanderbilt who was a clinical microbiologist. And this was before I even knew this was what I wanted to do. I was a little curious and I wanted to know more. And so I spent time with them, spent time learning from them, seeing what they do on the day-to-day basis. And so when I went to my interview, there were questions I was asked that I would have never been able to answer had I not spent time watching and learning and asking questions from somebody in that career path. So I think that gave me a huge advantage. I don't know that anybody else would have been able to answer the questions like I did. And it clearly opened the doors for me. So you always have to learn about the specific job that you're applying for and understand it in a way that maybe your cohort that would be applying with you would not understand it. That will give you the leg up in the interview.
Okay. So let's shift gears a little. Tell me more about your work-life balance and what that looks like.
So it's always a challenge trying to figure out work-life balance. And sometimes the balance goes this way and sometimes it's that way. You always have to be able to be flexible. When I was a fellow, there was no balance. It was all work. It was all me being a fellow. I lived in North Carolina that has some beautiful beaches not very far away. I saw them one time in 2 years. Right? There was no balance at all. It was a tremendous amount of work, and that's what it required. Now that I've moved out of my fellowship, I've had the opportunity to start a family, and it has meant that I can't have that same nonstop grind. That spending time with my daughter is the biggest joy that I have. And so it's required me to change the way that I look at my time and the way that I spend my time. So I think there's always, there's the saying that you can't have it all. And I think you can, just maybe not at the same time, at the same level. And I think right now I have it all. I've got a great job. I have a very supportive coworkers, very supportive upper management structure. I have a very supportive husband. And so with all of that, I'm able to balance both my job that can be very demanding, but then also balance my 1.5-year-old that can also be very demanding. And I think you can achieve it.
Okay. What is one of your favorite memories from your time at Vanderbilt?
Wow. I think the thing that I loved most about my time at Vanderbilt, we had a group that worked together looking at kind of just diversity and promoting diversity at Vanderbilt. And one time we had an international food cook-off, and some of the money was going to support an organization. And to be able to host that type of event and see all of the diverse cultures that are here at Vanderbilt. And we had food from everywhere and different samplings, and it was all, grad students, postdocs, faculty, all, brought food, and there was, voting and all of that. But to be able to see the diversity in the room and see all of the cultures that were represented, all of the people that were so proud of where they were and where they had come from, to be able to share that and to be at an institution that supported that, I think was a really great experience.
So what words of wisdom would you have for current trainees now, now that you are where you are?
I think I would say be patient. It can be hard when there's not a defined timeline to grad school. It's not like med school that's 4 years. It's not like law school, that everything has a defined timeline. So you really have to be patient and allow your project and all of that to develop. But as you're looking at your career and the futures that are ahead of you, there's so many options for a person getting a PhD. To explore those options, but not just on paper, not just on a computer search. But when you explore those options, reach out to people that are in those careers and find out what it is that they do, how they do it, if they like it, if they would choose that job again, what are the ups, what are the downs, and really reaching out to other people, I think, is the way that I was able to identify the career path that I'm in now and that I'm very happy doing.
Awesome. Well, thank you for coming and talking with us. We really appreciate your time.
Thanks. Glad to be here.